In the midst of the ocean, the hunters aboard the battleships prepared for the oncoming threat. Jong-soo, the leader of the Night Guild, was the first to spot the danger, noticing that the ants were flying directly towards them. The battleship's artillery roared to life, firing at full capacity as the ants approached. The sky was filled with the sound of booming explosions. Mage hunters on board joined forces, launching devastating magical attacks that added to the chaos. The sky lit up with a series of bright flashes and explosions, creating an atmosphere of absolute mayhem. Despite the relentless assault, the ants continued their advance, heading northbound towards the Night Guild. Sun Cahoon, the leader of the Hunters Guild squad, quickly issued commands to his guild members, urging them to prepare for battle as the ants closed in. The famed guild hunters also received their orders, instructed to slaughter every ant in sight. The fiend guild hunters, led by their determination to reclaim their honor and glory, steeled themselves for the fight, knowing that a single ant was as strong as a B-rank hunter. They formed battle positions, aware that falling out of formation could mean certain death. Amidst the tension, Min-sung, the A-rank hunter, trembled in fear. His anxiety was palpable, and another hunter nearby couldn't help but notice, thinking that despite his rank, Min-sung was clearly out of his depth. The sky grew darker as the ants nearly reached the ships, their numbers filling the horizon. Ju-hee was struck with fear as she realized the ants had already reached the shores of Hyundai. She questioned whether they were strong enough to face such a powerful enemy. The ants, with their wings spread and mandibles ready, closed in rapidly, their speed leaving little time for the hunters to react. Sung Cheol noticed just how fast the ants were approaching. They were now only an arm's length away, ready to attack. But just as the ants were about to strike, a blue streak of light flashed through the sky. It moved with incredible speed, tearing through the ants in midair, leaving them destroyed in its wake. Ju-hee and Cheol were both stunned by the sight. Ju-hee wondered what could have caused such a powerful strike, while Cheol marveled at the speed of the attack, unable to comprehend what he had just witnessed. The mysterious blue streak was none other than Baru, executing the command of his master Jin-Woo with deadly precision. Efforts to exterminate the ants continued relentlessly for 2 days in the southern regions of South Korea. The hunters and soldiers worked tirelessly, determined to eradicate every last one of the deadly creatures that had caused so much devastation. Meanwhile, the coast of China was not spared from the ant invasion. The relentless insects had already made their way into Chinese waters, causing widespread alarm. The crew on board a Chinese ship could hardly believe the sight before them. The ants had flown all the way to China, and the crew had not been able to sleep for 2 days as they battled against the relentless swarm. As the second wave of ants approached, now within shooting range, the crew awaited the order to fire. However, before they could act, an unknown hunter on board the ship stepped forward, his presence commanding the attention of everyone around. The hunter looked up at the sky, watching as the horde of ants drew closer. Despite the overwhelming numbers, he remained unfazed. With a determined expression, he unsheathed his swords and prepared for battle. The hunter clashed his swords together, unleashing a powerful energy that sent shockwaves rippling through the sky. The sheer force of his attack was devastating, causing explosions that echoed through the air. The bodies of the ants, unable to withstand the hunter's might, were split in half by the shockwaves. Their remains dropped into the ocean below, a testament to the hunter's overwhelming power. With the threat neutralized, the hunter calmly sheathed his swords, his expression one of mild disappointment. The battle had been too easy for someone of his caliber. As he surveyed the aftermath, the hunter couldn't help but think of the ant Jin-Woo had battled against. Had that powerful creature still been alive, the hunter mused that the battle might have been more challenging, perhaps even enjoyable. But with the ants now defeated, there was little left to do. The hunter sighed, lamenting the lack of a worthy opponent, and watched as the waves of the ocean carried away the remnants of the once formidable swarm. In the Scavenger Guild of the United States, tension filled the air as Laura, a high-ranking member of the guild, contemplated the situation at hand. She was deep in thought about the connection between Hwang Dong-soo and Sung Jin-Woo, two figures whose paths had crossed in a deadly incident. Laura suspected that Sung Jin-Woo might have been involved in the death of Hwang Dong-soo's older brother, which could explain why Hwang Dong-soo was now seeking revenge. As Laura considered the implications of this, she turned her thoughts to Thomas Andre, the guild master of the Scavenger Guild. Thomas Andre Andre, a man known for his formidable power and influence, had been looking forward to meeting Sung Jin-Woo in person. However, Laura realized that with the current circumstances, this meeting might be more difficult to arrange. The potential for conflict between Hwang Dong-soo and Sung Jin-Woo complicated matters further. Thomas Andre was not one to take threats lightly, especially when it concerned his guild. To him, Hwang Dong-soo was not just a member of the Scavenger Guild, he was considered the property of the guild, something that Thomas Andre would fiercely protect. The Scavenger Guild, in turn, was Thomas Andre's domain, and he would not tolerate anyone, not even the government of the United States, interfering with what he considered his. On the third night of the Jeju Island Raid, soldiers, along with hunters from the Knights Guild, the representative guild in the Yeongnam region, arrived on Jeju Island. Their mission was to collect essence stones and stand by in case of another incident. Jong-soo, the guild master of the Knights Guild, shared a story from his past as he led the group. Jong-soo reminisced about a man who never had much luck. This man, determined to be the best at what he did, dreamed of becoming a gold medalist. He trained relentlessly, pushing himself to become stronger, even going on strict diets to compete in a lower weight division. He endured intense training sessions, and everything seemed to be in place for him to compete in the Olympics. This was his lifelong dream, and he had passed all the doping tests. The night before the competition, he had a good dream and was in top condition. However, fate had other plans. A manometer evaluation revealed that he had been awakened, and he was subsequently barred from competing in the Olympics. Jong-soo revealed that the man in his story was himself. Despite having to give up on his dream of competing in the Olympics, he found a new calling. He vowed to create the country's best guild, a goal he was still pursuing with unwavering determination. As they continued their mission, Jong-soo proudly displayed the top quality essence stones they had collected. These stones represented his dream of creating the best guild in the country. Another hunter made a comment about the possibility of embezzlement, but Jong-soo dismissed it, focusing on the task at hand. The group continued to sweep the area, ensuring it was free of mana. Jong-soo reassured the others that it was safe to relax, as they believed the area had been thoroughly cleared. However, as they moved forward, Jong-soo spotted an ant that had been hiding. With swift precision, he sliced it with his blade, eliminating the threat. Jong-soo acknowledged that while there might be a few stragglers, there was no need to worry too much. He and the Knights Guild were there to protect the area and ensure the safety of everyone involved. As Yunate glanced to the other side, his eyes widened in shock. He spotted something alarming and quickly alerted Jong-soo, the guildmaster of the Knights Guild. Jong-soo, sensing the urgency in Yunate's voice, turned to see what had caused such a reaction. The soldiers in the group also noticed the disturbance, and a sense of unease spread among them as they saw a figure emerging from the shadows. The figure was an unknown stranger, someone who should not have been on Jeju Island. Jong-soo immediately questioned the presence of this stranger, as the only people authorized to be on the island were the soldiers and agents from the association who had assigned the mission to them. The stranger, however, did not fit any of these descriptions. Jong-soo and the other hunters could not determine whether the figure was human or something else entirely. The stranger moved closer, and the hunters hesitated to open fire. Uncertain of what they were dealing with, the figure had glowing yellow eyes, sharp teeth, and wild black hair, giving him an otherworldly appearance. He spoke in a language that none of the hunters could understand, a language that sounded as though it belonged to beasts rather than humans. Jong-soo and the others were taken aback, unsure of how to respond. The situation grew even more tense when it became clear that the stranger was not alone. A simple snap of fingers sent a piercing sound through the air. Within seconds, Jong-soo and his guild members went limp and collapsed to the ground. The stranger was accompanied by an elderly elf with blue skin and long silver hair. The humanoid beast, who had initially emerged from the shadows, questioned the elf's actions. However, the elf calmly explained that there was no need to cause any further commotion, and that he had only put the hunters to sleep temporarily. The humanoid beast confirmed that he had checked for the presence of a particular power, and the elf, puzzled, wondered why someone was helping the humans. The humanoid beast speculated that no one could truly understand the motives behind such actions, and suggested that if the elf was curious, he could ask the individual in question himself. The beast remarked on the stench of rotting ants in the area, and imagined how that woman would have reacted if she had witnessed the scene. The elf, however, was not deterred by these thoughts. He stated that the hunt would proceed as scheduled and that this situation did not change anything. The elderly elf then twirled his hand lightly, creating a black hole in midair, a gate just big enough for a single person to pass through. The humanoid beast mentioned that he believed one of them was present in South Korea and suggested taking care of the issue before leaving. The elf, however, preferred to leave the matter to someone else, not wanting to get involved directly. He left the interpretation of his actions up to the humanoid beast, stating that the beast could think whatever he wanted. As the elf's voice trailed off, he disappeared through the gate, which closed behind him with a faint sound. The humanoid beast, now alone, muttered under his breath, calling the elf a coward. He looked down at the humans lying helplessly on the ground, knowing they would soon wake up. Deciding that there was no need to complicate matters further, the humanoid beast quietly retracted his hand and vanished through another gate, leaving the area as silently as he had appeared. After the humanoid beast vanished through the gate, the island returned to an eerie silence. The hunters from the Knights Guild remained unconscious, scattered across the ground, unaware of the strange encounter they had just survived. The night on Jeju Island grew darker, with only the distant sounds of waves crashing against the shore. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching! Hunter Sung Jin-Woo arrived at the funeral, dressed in a black suit, his presence commanding the attention of reporters who quickly began snapping pictures. The funeral was held to honor the hunters who had lost their lives during the Jeju Island Raid, a mission that had gripped the entire nation. This raid had been Sung Jin-Woo's first official mission since being re-evaluated as an S-rank hunter. It was his public debut, and the world had watched in awe as he defeated the formidable Ant King while his summoned creatures dealt with the seemingly endless hordes of ants. The mission's success had been a massive event, with people pouring onto the internet to discuss every detail. Sung Jin-Woo's name was on everyone's lips. While many praised his extraordinary abilities, not all the comments were positive. Some criticized him, believing that if he had joined the raid earlier, the death toll might have been lower. Although there were those who supported Sung Jin-Woo, few could argue against the fact that lives had been lost, and the criticism lingered. Under a somber sky, Sung Jin-Woo stood before the memorial, his expression solemn as he paid his respects to the brave hunters who had fallen on Jeju Island. The atmosphere was heavy with grief, and the white flowers laid at the memorial spoke silently of sacrifice and courage. Mourners gathered around, sharing in the sorrow and paying their respects. Baek, filled with emotion after losing his friend Byung-gyu, approached Sung Jin-Woo. Baek had always believed that no single person could end a war alone, but the events of the raid had made him reconsider. Despite the tragedy, he acknowledged that Sung Jin-Woo had brought an end to the nightmare on Jeju Island. In total, 4,801 hunters had participated in the 5th Jeju Island Raid, alongside 727 awakened civilians who were called to fight. The death toll was grim, with 64 awakened beings and 32 civilians losing their lives in battle. However, the final raid had the fewest casualties compared to the previous 4 attempts, marking a small yet significant victory amidst the sorrow. Sung Jin-Woo sat down with President Go Gun-hee for a conversation. The topic of discussion was Jin-Woo's plans to form his own guild. As an S-rank hunter, Jin-Woo didn't need to go through the usual process of obtaining a guildmaster's license. President Go explained that all it would take was a simple phone call to the Hunters Association, and they would handle everything for him. Jin-Woo considered this information, thinking that it might be a good idea to also look into the benefits that came with being an S-rank hunter. During their conversation, President Go brought up an unusual occurrence on Jeju Island. Soldiers and hunters had been sent to the island to clean up the remains of the ants and collect essence stones. However, something strange had happened. They all lost consciousness while on the island. The hunters involved were A rank or B rank, including members of the Knights Guild. President Go wondered if Jin-Woo had cast a barrier on the island and possibly forgotten about it. Jin-Woo was confused by the suggestion and clarified that he had not done anything like that. President Go seemed to believe him, but was still puzzled by the situation. The soldiers and hunters had no memory of what happened before they lost consciousness, leaving the association with no way of determining whether they had been under a magic spell or if something else was at play. Jin-Woo considered the possibility that it could have been a trap left behind by the ants. Their conversation was interrupted when an employee of the association approached President Go to inform him that a guest had arrived earlier than expected. President Go apologized to Jin-Woo, explaining that he needed to leave. Jin-Woo acknowledged the thanks from President Go, assuring him that it was no trouble at all. Sung Jin-Woo decided it was time to head back, so he made his way to his car. Just as he was about to leave, he heard a voice from behind. Turning around, he saw a man approaching him. The man introduced himself as Adam White, a senior official from the Federal Bureau of Hunters. This surprised Jin-Woo, as he had never dealt with the Federal Bureau of Hunters before. Adam explained that it had been difficult to track Jin-Woo down, even mentioning that he had stopped by Jin-Woo's office. This made Jin-Woo recall a previous conversation with Jin-Ho, where Jin-Ho had mentioned someone like Adam had even given him a visiting card. Curious, Jin-Woo asked why Adam wanted to meet with him. Adam revealed that he had some important information to share, information that no other country or institution could provide except for the Bureau. Jin-Woo wondered why they would share such valuable information with him, and Adam explained that the Bureau benefited from sharing knowledge with special individuals like Jin-Woo. The recent raid on Jeju Island had left a strong impression on the Bureau's deputy director, who wanted to meet Jin-Woo in person to discuss matters further. Adam had a car waiting nearby and invited Jin-Woo to meet the deputy director. Jin-Woo considered the offer, thinking about the information that Adam claimed to have. As he opened his car door, he expressed his doubts about the reliability of the information. He told Adam that he would think it over and reach out later. However, before Jin-Woo could leave, Adam mentioned something that caught his attention, a term he had never heard before, an upgrader. Adam explained that an upgrader was an awakened being who could enhance the abilities of another awakened being. This piqued Jin-Woo's curiosity, prompting him to sit with Adam in his car and drive off to meet the deputy director. Sung Jin-Woo arrived at his destination with Adam White, who announced their arrival. Inside, they were greeted by Michael Connor, the deputy director of the Federal Bureau of Hunters. Connor introduced himself and quickly got to the point, presenting Jin-Woo with immigration documents. These documents, which usually take years to process, were offered to Jin-Woo with the promise of instant American citizenship if he accepted. However, Jin-Woo was more interested in the information that Adam had mentioned earlier. He asked about the possibility of an awakened being enhancing the abilities of another, specifically an upgrader. Connor confirmed that such a person existed, and with a grin called for her to enter. A middle-aged woman named Norma Selner walked in. Connor introduced her as the only person in the world capable of enhancing an awakened being's abilities. Jin-Woo immediately sensed that she was a completely different type of awakened being. Miss Selner began to explain her powers, noting the suspicion in Jin-Woo's eyes. She acknowledged that most people were skeptical at first, but assured him that once they experienced her abilities, they would be convinced. She explained that every awakened being has a limit to their strength, and without a second awakening, they cannot surpass those limits. However, she possessed the power to help awakened beings reach beyond their potential through a process that involved 3 stages, lifting their limitations. Connor confirmed everything she said, adding that Miss Selner required a long period of rest after using her powers, so only 3 or 4 awakened individuals could benefit from her aid each year. Jin-Woo began to consider whether he would be one of those few people. If what she said was true, her ability was remarkable. When Jin-Woo asked about the effectiveness of the process, Miss Selner explained that it varied from person to person, but after completing all 3 stages, an individual could experience a 20% to 30% increase in strength. This revelation shocked Jin-Woo. He now understood why a powerful hunter like Hwang Dong-soo had decided to move to America, despite the backlash he faced from the public. Such an opportunity was too good to pass up for any hunter. Jin-Woo realized that if a word got out about Miss Selner's powers, it could cause significant problems. Connor acknowledged this concern, explaining that they ensured her safety while also compensating her with a suitable salary. In return, Miss Selner enhanced the abilities of the hunters they selected. The Bureau wanted to offer this incredible gift to Sung Jin-Woo, recognizing the potential impact of her abilities on someone as powerful as him. Sung Jin-Woo considered the offer presented to him, thinking about the so-called gift that Michael Connor and Norma Selner were discussing. Connor assured him that once he became a hunter for the Federal Bureau, he would receive top priority and preferential benefits, along with help in securing the best contract with the guild of his choice. Norma Selner reiterated that there was no rush to make a decision. They were simply introducing him to what they could offer. Jin-Woo was skeptical and questioned the idea of receiving something for nothing. However, Connor and Selner emphasized that this was a complimentary service, a gesture of goodwill. Jin-Woo remembered Selner's earlier confidence that he would be begging for more once he experienced her abilities. Norma Selner gently took hold of Jin-Woo's wrist and with a kind smile beckoned him closer. She instructed him to look into her eyes as she began the first step of the process. Connor, observing the interaction, was pleased, thinking that Jin-Woo had taken the bait. gate. He believed that once the first stage was completed, Jin-Woo would be eager to continue and might even sign the papers immediately. As Norma gazed into Jin-Woo's eyes, she suddenly found herself surrounded by darkness. She searched frantically but saw nothing until a shadow emerged. It moved closer, revealing its terrifying presence as it opened its eyes and stared directly at her. Overwhelmed by fear, Norma screamed and fell off her chair, utterly terrified by what she had seen. The two agents guarding Norma instantly drew their guns, pointing them at Jin-Woo in a panic. Michael Connor, alarmed by their actions, quickly intervened, shouting at the agents to lower their weapons. He reminded them of who Jin-Woo was, warning them that if they had acted this way towards someone like Thomas Andre or Liu Zhigang, they would all be dead. Realizing their mistake, the agents quickly holstered their guns and rushed to help the trembling Norma, whose face had turned pale. Michael bowed deeply to Jin-Woo, apologizing profusely for the agent's behavior. Jin-Woo, still trying to make sense of what had just happened, reassured Michael that it was okay. Michael then scolded the agents, making it clear how reckless their actions had been. The agents, thoroughly chastised, could only respond with a fearful acknowledgement, realizing the gravity of their mistake. After the unsettling incident, Michael Connor rushed to Norma Selner's side as she trembled in fear. He noticed that she was covered in sweat and asked her with concern if she was feeling unwell. Her condition was alarming, and Michael quickly decided it would be best to reschedule their meeting with Sung Jin-Woo. Jin-Woo, though curious about what had transpired, agreed to leave, and Michael instructed Adam White to show Jin-Woo the way out. Once Jin-Woo had left, Michael remained alone with Norma in the room, eager to understand what had just happened. He asked her what had gone wrong, noticing that the situation had clearly shaken her. Norma, still struggling to catch her breath, pressed her hand against her chest and finally managed to speak. She revealed that during the encounter, she had sensed something extraordinary about Jin-Woo. Norma described Jin-Woo as a king, a powerful king unlike any she had ever encountered before. Michael's eyes widened in shock at her words. He asked if this meant Jin-Woo was as strong as a national-level hunter, but Norma, still trembling, explained that this wasn't something she could easily measure. She confessed that she had never experienced anything like it before. While looking at Jin-Woo, she felt as though something within him was staring back at her. Norma clarified that it wasn't Jin-Woo himself, but rather an infinite darkness within him. This darkness, vast and terrifying, had gazed into her as she tried to peer into Jin-Woo's soul. The encounter had left her deeply shaken, and as she continued to tremble in fear, she shared one last critical insight with Michael. There was no limit to Jin-Woo's powers. At the Hunter Association, Go Gun-hee sat alone, deep in thought. He was troubled by recent events, particularly the loss of Hunter Min Byung-yu. Though Min Byung-yu had retired, his noble sacrifice during the raid weighed heavily on Go Gun-hee's heart. He realized that the challenges ahead might bring more sacrifices, and that thought filled him with dread. As he pondered, the phone on his table rang loudly, snapping him out of his thoughts. When he answered, an urgent voice on the other end informed him of a B-rank gate that had appeared in the middle of a road. Gun-hee's eyes widened in surprise. A B-rank gate was not something an average attack squad could handle, and it required immediate attention. As he considered which big guild to contact, he suddenly remembered that Hunter Sung Jin-Woo had recently opened an office near the area. Meanwhile, traffic was building up on the road where Jin-Woo was driving. Deep in thought, Jin-Woo was trying to make sense of what Norma Selner had seen in him. He knew she had been terrified, but he couldn't figure out exactly what she had seen. Jin-Woo's phone vibrated and he glanced at the caller ID. It was President Go Gun-hee. Curious, Jin-Woo answered the call. Gun-hee, the chairman of the Hunter Association, spoke with a tone that suggested something urgent. Gun-hee informed Jin-Woo about a gate that had appeared in the middle of the road, causing severe traffic issues. It was a B-rank gate, and Gun-hee asked if Jin-Woo could take care of it. Jin-Woo, somewhat surprised, questioned whether he could do so without proper permission. However, Gun-hee reassured him with a lighthearted remark, reminding Jin-Woo that as the chairman of the Hunter Association, he could grant that permission. Jin-Woo couldn't help but smile at Gun-hee's playful tone. With the chairman's blessing, Jin-Woo stepped out of the van, ready to take on the task. He followed the trail of mana leading to the gate. Reporters had already gathered around the portal, and the police were helping association employees cordon off the area. As Jin-Woo approached the gate, a female employee blocked his path, demanding to know what he was doing. She quickly recognized him as an S-rank hunter, and her surprise was evident. The crowd soon realized who he was, and excitement spread as they recognized that Sung Jin-Woo himself was there to handle the gate. The female employee, still trying to enforce the rules, reminded Jin-Woo that even as an S-rank, he couldn't just enter without proper authorization organization and enough people. Sensing the situation was becoming complicated, Jin-Woo made an urgent call to President Go-Gunny. Handing the phone to the female employee, Jin-Woo told her to speak to someone she couldn't ignore, the chairman himself. Trembling, the female employee spoke to Gun-hee and quickly agreed to let Jin-Woo proceed. Jin-Woo then entered the gate without hesitation, disappearing from sight. The female employee, still frustrated by the situation, muttered to herself, hoping he might trip and hurt himself. However, her thoughts were interrupted by screams from the crowd. The black surface of the gate had suddenly turned blood red. It was a red gate. The sight of it sent shivers down everyone's spine, and the female employee panicked, wondering if her ill wishes had somehow caused this terrifying change. As Jin-Woo entered the gate, a heavy feeling washed over him. This wasn't an ordinary gate, it was a red gate, a place where the exit would remain sealed until the mission was completed. Jin-Woo knew that he might have to push himself beyond his limits to get through this. His thoughts drifted back to a recent conversation with his mother, Kyung-hee. She had expressed her hopes for him, acknowledging that his awakening as an S-rank hunter was something beyond their control. She reminded him of his father, who had once been a firefighter before becoming a hunter. Jin-Woo's mother had fallen in love with his father after seeing him save people, and she understood that Jin-Woo had inherited that same sense of duty, but she had also warned him not to overdo it, to be careful. Jin-Woo felt a sense of relief knowing that his mother wasn't against his path as a hunter. Her words echoed in his mind as he prepared for the battle ahead. "This won't be too much for me," he assured himself. The battle began with Jin-Woo's shadow soldiers clashing against the magic beasts that swarmed the gate. Amidst the chaos, Jin-Woo stood tall, commanding his army with precision. The shadow soldiers, powerful and relentless, tore through the ranks of the magic beasts, annihilating them one by one. Jin-Woo knew that a hunter's true enemy wasn't just the monsters. They also had to avoid being hunted themselves. The roles could reverse in an instant, and even the most skilled hunters had to remain vigilant. No matter how many hunts a hunter faced, the hunt would never end. Jin-Woo understood this all too well, but he had no intention of stopping. With a cold glint in his eyes, he surveyed the battlefield. The first wave of enemies had been crushed, but there were more challenges ahead. Jin-Woo, determined to finish the job within the day, moves on to the next target. The hunt continued, and Jin-Woo was ready for whatever came next. The boss of the gate emerged, flanked by his guards, his presence commanding and confident. He looked around, searching for the one responsible for the massacre of his people. With a tone of authority, he spoke, impressed yet enraged. The boss had noticed that the small intruder had managed to come this far, slaughtering his people and even speaking their language. But his confidence quickly turned to confusion as he called out for his forces, expecting them to surround the intruder. He shouted for them to come out, but there was no response. The silence was deafening. What the boss didn't realize was that Jin-Woo's shadow soldiers had already decimated his troops, eliminating them on their way to the heart of the gate. Jin-Woo found the situation amusing. Small, now that's funny, he thought as he commanded his shadow soldiers to reveal themselves. One by one, the magic beasts began to fall, ambushed by the shadow soldiers who had been lying in wait. They struck with precision, dropping the beasts effortlessly, like cutting through butter. Jin-Woo surveyed the battlefield and noted that there was no one left. The boss of the magic beasts was stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Panic set in as he realized that his forces had been wiped out. Desperate, the boss rolled out his palm, calling forth his hidden soldiers from the trees. The trees broke, forming more magic beasts, but before they could even take a step forward, Baru, one of Jin-Woo's strongest shadow soldiers, sniped off their heads with deadly accuracy. Jin-Woo, along with his shadow army, marched forward with an overwhelming aura that was impossible to miss. The boss, now paralyzed with fear, could barely utter a word. The realization that he was completely outmatched struck him hard. Jin-Woo gave the command, and his shadow army sprang into action. Leading the charge this time was Baru, the powerful ant-like shadow. The magic beasts, sensing the imminent threat, rushed forward with ferocity, but they were no match for the shadow soldiers. The battlefield turned into a scene of chaos as Jin-Woo's forces brutally ripped apart their enemies piece by piece. The clash was intense, with the shadow soldiers showing no mercy. Two centaur beasts, larger and more menacing than the rest, leaped toward Jin-Woo, their weapons aimed directly at him. However, before they could even get close, Tank, one of Jin-Woo's most fearsome shadow beasts, intercepted them. With incredible strength, Tank tore the centaurs apart, adding to the mayhem that was already unfolding. The boss of the magic beasts, witnessing the destruction of his forces, screamed in agony, calling out for his fallen children, but his cries went unanswered as Baru charged at him with lightning speed. Baru's sharp claws pierced pierced through the boss while Igris slashed the boss's arm clean off. The boss dropped to the ground with a heavy thud, fluid spilling from his wounds as he screamed in pain. Tusk used his skill, Hymn of Giants, to increase his size dramatically. Then activating his skill, Inverse Gravity, Tusk slammed the already weakened boss into the ground with overwhelming force. The impact shook the battlefield, and the boss was left lying there, broken and bleeding. Jin-Woo approached the defeated boss, his presence commanding and cold. He looked down at the magic beast, who was now barely clinging to life, and demanded answers. Jin-Woo made it clear that the beast's suffering would be lessened if he cooperated, but the boss remained silent, blood continuing to pour from his mouth. Jin-Woo sighed, realizing that the system might be interfering again, preventing the beast from speaking. "You've got nothing to say, huh?" Jin-Woo thought to himself, "It must be the system blocking you, but I'll find out the truth sooner or later." Jin-Woo opened his inventory, and with a focused expression, he took out a key. A key that had come from the cursed random box, obtained after defeating the demon monarch, King Baran, in the demon castle. At the time, the key had held no information, leaving Jin-Woo puzzled about its purpose. As Jin-Woo reflected on his recent achievements, he recalled reaching level 100 during the Jeju Island Raid. This milestone had unlocked new information about the mysterious key. The system had finally provided details. The required conditions had been fulfilled. The key unlocks the entrance to the Kartanon Temple. It can be used at the designated gate. The location of the designated gate will be revealed after the allotted time passes. The name flashed in Jin-Woo's mind, Kartanon Temple. It struck him with a sense of familiarity, and he quickly pieced together the memories. The double dungeon, the old temple at its end, the stone statues, and the stone slate held by one of them. It all came rushing back to him. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Jin-Woo realized that the system was calling him back to the place where everything had begun. The dungeon where he had first encountered the terrifying stone statues, the same place that had set him on his path as a hunter, was now beckoning him once more. But this time, it felt different. If everything had been arranged from the very start, if the system had been waiting for him to return, then Jin-Woo knew he had to answer that call. With determination in his eyes, Jin-Woo made up his mind. The system had challenged him once again, and he was ready to face whatever awaited him. If that's the part, then wait for me. With a steely resolve in his heart, Jin-Woo said, "I will be coming soon." Jin-Ho's eyes narrowed as he focused on the computer screen, his determination evident in the sharpness of his gaze. Like a hawk targeting its prey, he scanned the posts and comments with a burning intensity. He was on a mission to protect Jin-Woo's reputation, and nothing would stop him. Quickly, Jin-Ho took screenshots of the offending content and began reporting them. The rhythm of his typing filled the room until he finally paused, lifting his hands to wipe the sweat from his brow. Just then, Jin-Woo appeared silently beside him, startling Jin-Ho out of his concentration. Without warning, Jin-Woo asked if everything was alright, causing Jin-Ho to jump from his seat in surprise. He spun around, recognizing his boss standing there, dressed in his hunting gear. Jin-Woo inquired if there had been any trouble, but Jin-Ho assured him there wasn't. He then asked why Jin-Woo was dressed that way, to which Jin-Woo casually replied that he had just come out of a gate. He explained that they needed money for the guild, and so he had brought back some high-level magical cores. Jin-Ho was impressed, realizing that Jin-Woo had just cleared a high-ranked gate and secured their financial stability. This meant they wouldn't have to worry about salaries for their future employees. Jin-Woo seemed puzzled when Jin-Ho mentioned employees, reminding Jin-Woo that they needed one more member to officially establish the guild. Then Jin-Ho brought up another urgent matter, the name for their guild. Jin-Woo initially thought it wasn't a serious issue, but Jin-Ho emphasized its importance. He suggested various names, like Sung-Yu Guild, combining their last names, or Woo-Ho Guild, using the last characters in their names. He even proposed Jin-Jin Guild, using their middle characters. However, Jin-Woo casually suggested Solo Play Guild, reflecting the nature of his solo player style. Jin-Ho was momentarily taken aback, wondering if Jin-Woo was trying to be humorous. Despite his admiration for Jin-Woo, Jin-Ho couldn't help but think that perhaps humor was one area where his boss wasn't quite as skilled. It reminded him that even someone as extraordinary as Jin-Woo was still human. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Jin-Ho paused, curious about who could be visiting. As he creaked open the door, a voice drifted in, asking if this was Hunter Sung Jinu's guild office. Jin-Ho confirmed it, but was taken aback when the visitor stepped in. It was Hunter Cha Hae-in. Jin-Woo was equally surprised to see her. He couldn't fathom why someone like her would be at his office. When he asked, Hae-in simply stated that she wanted to join his guild. Jin-Woo was confused and sought clarification, unsure of what was happening. He wondered if the president of the Hunters Association had sent her, or if she had been kicked out of her previous guild, but Hae-in denied both. Jin-Woo then asked her why she would want to join his guild. Solo play. Hae-in seemed rattled, not expecting that to be the name of the guild. Jin-Woo saw no issue with the name, explaining that both he and Jin-Ho had agreed on it. Jin-Ho quickly corrected him, insisting that no such decision had been made, but Jin-Woo assumed they had reached a consensus. As the situation grew more perplexing, Jin-Woo tried to calm his thoughts, realizing his judgment was clouded. He carefully observed Hae-in, her pulse, breathing, and expression. Although she tried to remain calm, Jin-Woo sensed she was hiding something. He wondered why she was so eager to join his guild. Jin-Woo brought up that it had been 2 years since Hae-in had awakened and assumed she was still under contract with her current guild. Hae-in surprised him by saying she was willing to pay the penalty to break her contract, even without expecting any compensation from Jin-Woo's guild. Perplexed, Jin-Woo pressed her further, asking why she wanted to join a guild that had little to offer her. Hae-in hesitated, bowing her head without answering. She couldn't bring herself to explain that from the first time they met, she had been drawn to him, particularly to his scent. She also recalled the overwhelming feelings she experienced during the battle on Jeju Island, where she had been certain she would die. But when she woke up in the helicopter, unable to believe she was still alive, the first name that came to her mind was Jin-Woo. The president had confirmed it too. Jin-Woo's presence had brought her comfort in the face of death. Embarrassed, Hae-in found it difficult to admit that she wanted Jin-Woo by her side in such moments, as it was something deeply personal. Jin-Woo, meanwhile, reflected on how differently Hae-in had behaved at the funeral, sensing that she had been planning this for a while. Finally, Hae-in gave a simple, prepared response, meeting Jin-Woo's eyes. She said she wanted a simpler life, as if trying to downplay the true reasons behind her decision. Jin-Woo considered the situation carefully as he listened to Jin-Ho's thoughts. Jin-Ho reminded him of how much pressure Hunter Cha Hae-in must have faced from the Hunters Guild to stay with them, especially given her young age, only around 22 or 23. Jin-Woo understood the burden of being an S-rank hunter, and the struggles the Hunters Guild had endured during the Jeju Island Raid. He empathized with Hae-in's situation, but he also needed to be cautious. To test her resolve, Jin-Woo decided to introduce an entrance test for his guild. Hae-in was surprised, as this wasn't mentioned in the recruitment notice, but Jin-Woo smoothly explained that it was a rule and perhaps an oversight on Jin-Ho's part. He then sent Jin-Ho to fetch some drinks and snacks, giving them some time to prepare. As soon as Hae-in heard the word test, she grew serious, her expression becoming more determined. Jin-Woo was a bit caught off guard, unsure if she was being serious or just stubborn. However, the look in her eyes showed a hidden passion and determination. Jin-Woo informed her that the test would involve facing one of his summons, specifically his strongest one. Hae-in didn't back down, showing no fear or hesitation. She was ready for the challenge and wanted to proceed immediately. Jin-Woo suggested they head to the gymnasium of the association to conduct the test. Both of them rose to their feet as if they had planned this moment together. As they prepared to leave, Jin-Woo realized that the gymnasium was quite far from their current location. He wanted to test if his shadow exchange skill could transport both of them together. Jin-Woo reassured Hae-in that they didn't need to leave the room in the usual way. They could take a shortcut by sticking close to each other for a moment. Hae-in felt a lump in her throat as Jin-Woo approached her, his face closer than she had expected. Jin-Woo activated the shadow exchange skill, and both of them soundlessly sank into their shadows. Just as they vanished, Jin-Ho returned to the room with tea and snacks, only to find an embarrassed-looking high orc shadow soldier in their place. The orc quickly snatched the snacks and began eating them. As Jin-Woo and Hae-in traveled through the shadows, Jin-Woo confirmed his theory about the true nature of the shadow exchange skill. It created a gate, allowing them to pass through together, with the shadow on the ground serving as the entry point and the destination determined by the location of one of his soldiers. This ability was remarkable, enabling him to travel great distances in an instant, with only a 3-hour cooldown between uses. As they arrived at the gymnasium, the lights turned on automatically, reacting to their mana. The gym was brightly lit, and Hae-in was amazed by the skill she had just experienced. She looked around in wonder before her gaze settled on Jin-Woo, who was ready to begin the test. Jin-Woo decided it was was time to begin, but Yin suddenly remembered she had left her weapon behind. When Jin-Woo teased her about the pickaxe, she blushed, embarrassed by the memory. Jin-Woo chuckled, reassuring her that he was only joking. Yin considered borrowing a weapon from the storage and walked over to the door, using her hunter's license to access the keycard reader. Jin-Woo mentioned that hunters could use the reserve weapons from the gymnasiums, although they weren't of the highest quality and were mainly for practice. Yin inspected the weapons and selected a sword similar in length to her usual one. Feeling ready, Yin confirmed her choice, but Jin-Woo was concerned that she might not be comfortable with a weapon that wasn't hers. Yin, however, dismissed this, noting that in battles, monsters never fought on their terms anyway. Jin-Woo agreed with her sentiment, knowing that an ordinary soldier would easily be torn apart in a fight. He called forth a smaller shadow from his own, which moved a few paces away before a knight silently emerged. It was Igris, the best swordsman among Jin-Woo's shadow soldiers. Jin-Woo explained the conditions for winning or losing. Victory would come from destroying the summon, while defeat would occur if Yin chose to surrender. He realized that calling on his strongest soldier Baru would be too overwhelming for Yin, potentially traumatic even, so he settled on Igris for this test. Yin nodded in agreement, readying the sword she had borrowed from the equipment room. Jin-Woo, however, hesitated, recalling her earlier statement that weapons didn't matter. He asked her to turn back for a moment, and when she complied, he took the Demon Monarch's sword from his inventory and handed it to Igris. With everything in place, Jin-Woo signaled the start, and Yin prepared herself for the challenge ahead. Jin-Woo signaled to Yin that everything was ready. As she turned, she noticed Igris holding a sword crackling with blue electricity, a weapon he hadn't been wielding earlier. Without hesitation, Igris made the first move, swinging the Demon Monarch's sword with deadly precision. A bolt of lightning shot straight at Yin. She instinctively bent backward, narrowly avoiding the blast with the agility of a cat. The bolt struck the wall behind her, leaving a blackened scorch mark as evidence of its power. Jin-Woo observed the scene, impressed by her speed, knowing that an ordinary person would have been fatally wounded by even a slight graze from that attack. Yin gripped her sword tightly and charged forward, her focus unwavering. Igris, determined to make her surrender as instructed, met her head on. Their blades collided with a fierce clash, sending sparks flying. Meanwhile, President Go Gun-hee was in his office, situated on the highest floor of the main association building. From his vantage point, he could see all the association buildings and the surrounding area as he read through confidential reports, and something outside his window caught his attention. The lights were on in the supposedly empty gym. Confused, Gun-hee buzzed his secretary to check if someone had rented the gym for the day. When informed that there was no booking, Gun-hee asked for the surveillance cameras to be turned on and the feed displayed on his monitor. To his surprise, the screen showed Jin-Woo and Yin in the gym. Gun-hee's initial shock turned into a smile as he wondered if the two hunters were in a relationship. He recalled that when Yin had first regained consciousness in the helicopter, the first person she had asked about was Jin-Woo. The realization made him grin fondly as he watched the scene unfold. Deciding to respect their privacy, Gun-hee asked his secretary to turn off the surveillance cameras in the gym, citing a maintenance check in the records. Once the TV turned off, Gun-hee chuckled to himself as he returned to his reports. However, a slight tremor from the gym caused the walls of his office to ripple. Gun-hee didn't look up, but the smile on his face remained. The thought of youth and the energy it brought warmed his heart as he continued with his work, content with the scene he had just witnessed. Jin-Woo realized he might have underestimated Yin's abilities. Despite giving Igris the powerful Demon Monarch sword, Yin was still too strong for the knight. As soon as Igris was overwhelmed and crashed into the wall, Jin-Woo called off the match. However, Yin wasn't satisfied. She questioned whether Igris was truly the strongest summon Jin-Woo had and insisted on facing the strongest one now. Jin-Woo hesitated, concerned that Yin might get hurt, but she was determined. She expressed her desire to fight the strongest summon again, no matter the risk. After considering her resolve, Jin-Woo finally agreed. He summoned Baru, the shadow ant with an intimidating presence. Although shadow soldiers were generally weaker than their living counterparts, Baru was different. He had been created solely as a weapon to kill hunters, making him a formidable opponent. Baru, ever loyal to Jin-Woo, sought confirmation of his orders. Jin-Woo commanded him to defeat Yin, but emphasized that she must not be harmed. With his mission clear, Baru unleashed a fearsome battle cry that echoed through the gym, so powerful that the light bulbs above shattered, plunging the room into darkness. The sheer force of his roar sent a wave of terror through Yin as she witnessed the raw, untamed power radiating from Baru. His blade-like claws, sharp and deadly, extended menacingly from his fingers, ready to strike. However, just as the tension peaked, Jin-Woo sternly reminded Baru of his command, not to harm her. The warning was was enough to make Baru instantly retract his claws, his fierce resolve tempered by his unwavering obedience to his king. Ahjin noticed an opening and seized the moment. However, before she could react, Baru disappeared from her sight and reappeared behind her in an instant. Recognizing the move from a previous encounter, Ahjin steeled herself, refusing to fall for the same trick twice. Despite being momentarily stunned by Baru's incredible speed, her reflexes kicked in and she launched a flurry of attacks. Ahjin's sword struck out dozens of times, but Baru skillfully avoided each blow without even moving from his spot. His movements were precise and efficient, so quick that they left after images in their wake. The overwhelming difference in power between them became glaringly clear. Baru had been given a clear command by Jin-Woo: defeat his opponent without causing her harm. Confident in his abilities, Baru knew this task would be simple. He planned to show Ahjin the vast difference in their strength, making her lose the will to continue fighting. Ahjin, however, was in disbelief. No matter how many strikes she made, Baru dodged them all effortlessly, even at such close range. She couldn't understand how he managed to avoid her attacks without even taking a step back. When she aimed for his neck, he merely leaned back slightly, easily evading the blow. No matter how she varied her attacks, he moved out of harm's way with ease. Confusion and frustration began to set in for Ahjin. Baru wasn't even a real magic beast. He was merely a minion borrowing the power of a dead one. How could he be so powerful? And what kind of strength did Jin-Woo possess to control such a powerful minion with ease? Then he closed the distance between them, and Ahjin was suddenly overwhelmed by the stench of death emanating from him. In that moment, she felt it was over. Baru's wide open mouth filled her vision, and she couldn't help but let out a scream, expecting the worst. But instead of attacking, Baru released a terrifying roar. The sheer force of his magic power pushed Ahjin back, leaving her momentarily stunned. Jin-Woo watched the one-sided fight with a grimace, finding no pleasure in the spectacle. He asked Ahjin if she was satisfied, hoping she would yield, but with determination still burning in her eyes, Ahjin refused to give up. She insisted that she could still fight, despite the overwhelming odds against her. Jin-Woo watched the fight, trying to understand Ahjin's intentions. He hadn't expected her to continue fighting after recognizing the vast difference in strength between herself and Baru. Baru was unlike Jin-Woo's other shadow soldiers. Although intelligent, he was still a killing machine at heart. Even now, Jin-Woo could sense Baru suppressing his overwhelming thirst to kill. Jin-Woo hoped Ahjin wouldn't make a misstep, especially if she was aiming for a weak spot. Suddenly, Baru's instincts flared up. He couldn't tolerate a prey standing up against its predator. Furious, Baru extended his claws and lunged at Ahjin, but she dodged his attack skillfully. They locked eyes, and the tension between them was palpable. Ahjin decided to use her most confident move, a skill called Sword Dance. She moved with increasing speed, her blade drawing elegant arcs in the air as if she were dancing. The sound of metal clashing filled the space as Baru blocked her relentless strikes with his claws. Despite his calm exterior, Baru's displeasure was evident. Growing tired of the game, Baru decided to end it. With his bare hand, he grabbed Ahjin's sword as it came toward him and shattered it. Half the blade broke off, but Ahjin's resolve didn't waver. Her eyes blazed with a cold fury as she focused all her magic power on the remaining piece of her sword. She was about to reveal a skill she had never used before, Sword of Light. The blade glowed brightly, and Ahjin saw her chance. Baru, having lowered his guard after breaking her sword, was unprepared for her next move. Ahjin leaped toward him, thrusting her weapon forward. Jin-Woo, watching in astonishment, realized the danger. In that brief moment, Baru's mind reset, erasing Jin-Woo's command to defeat Ahjin without harming her. Instead, an old command from his former queen resurfaced in his mind: annihilate all enemies. Baru now saw Ahjin as an enemy to be destroyed. Baru, claws outstretched, launched himself at Ahjin with lethal intent. She froze in place, unable to react, fear gripping her as she closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. Just as Baru's claws were about to reach her, Jin-Woo intervened. He barely made it in time, catching Baru's claws with his bare hands, preventing the attack. Baru trembled as his eyes met Jin-Woo's, and understanding his mistake, Baru leaped back, dropping to the ground and begging for forgiveness. Jin-Woo knew why Baru had acted this way. The soldier's instincts to protect his master had been strong enough to override Jin-Woo's command. For a moment, Jin-Woo glared at Baru before looking to the side, where Ahjin had fallen to the ground. Exhausted from the intense battle, Jin-Woo, concerned by Ahjin's determination, questioned her motives. He couldn't understand why she was pushing herself so hard. The test they were undergoing was was just an entrance exam for a nameless guild. A hunter of Haeyin's caliber didn't need to risk her life over something like this. It simply wasn't worth it. Jin-Woo asked her why she was going to such lengths, hoping for an answer that made sense. But Haeyin didn't respond. Her silence only deepened Jin-Woo's confusion. He asked again, wondering if there was something more to her actions. Could it be that she was interested in him? The thought seemed outlandish, but it was the only explanation that came to mind. Haeyin seemed taken aback, almost as if the question had jolted her out of her daze. Jin-Woo, sensing her surprise, shrugged it off. Perhaps he had been wrong, and there was another reason for her determination. However, after a brief pause, Haeyin collected her thoughts and quietly admitted that Jin-Woo was right. She did have feelings for him. Her simple admission surprised Jin-Woo, adding a new layer of understanding to the situation. At the Federal Bureau of Hunters in the United States, the atmosphere in the Hunter Command Center was tense. Director David Brennan wasn't pleased with the recent news. His men had failed to recruit Sung Jin-Woo, a powerful hunter they had been keen on bringing into their fold. The assistant director entered the office, accompanied by Norma Selner, a specialist with unique abilities. David Brennan, eager to get to the bottom of the situation, immediately asked for an explanation. He wasn't interested in apologies, he needed to know what had happened. Michael explained that according to Norma Selner's observations, Sung Jin-Woo was not just an ordinary hunter, he was one of the kings. This revelation shocked the director. He asked if this meant that Sung Jin-Woo was as powerful as a national-level hunter, someone with immense strength and influence. Norma Selner began to elaborate. She explained that all awakened hunters draw their powers from a place known as the other side. The connection between a hunter and this other side is what she could sense. Sometimes the force from the other side was so strong that some hunters appeared to her as streaks of blinding light, which she referred to as kings. However, in Sung Jin-Woo's case, things were different. Norma shivered as she recalled her experience. When she looked into Jin-Woo's eyes, she didn't see a connection to the other side. Instead, she saw darkness, an overwhelming, all-consuming darkness. Sung Jin-Woo didn't borrow his strength from somewhere else. He was the source of his own power. There were no limitations, no connections to channel his abilities. He was the darkness itself, a force beyond anything she had encountered before. The director, deep in thought, asked if this meant Sung Jin-Woo was an evil person. Norma clarified that she wasn't speaking about good or evil, but rather the nature of his power. Jin-Woo didn't rely on an external connection for his strength, which meant that the usual limitations didn't apply to him. As the weight of Norma's words settled in, the assistant director, Michael, couldn't help but shiver. The realization struck him hard. There was no limit to Sung Jin-Woo's powers. Norma nodded in agreement, confirming the terrifying truth. Director Brennan, now understanding the gravity of the situation, thanked Norma Selner for her time. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications of what they had just learned. Michael watched as Director Brennan abruptly stood up from his desk, clearly with a plan in mind. Curiosity piqued. He asked where the director was headed. Brennan, without missing a beat, instructed Michael to follow him to the basement level 24. Both men walked briskly to the elevator and stepped inside. As the elevator descended, Brennan began to speak. He explained that if they couldn't use Norma Selner's abilities to recruit Sung Jin-Woo, they would need to find another way. He reminded Michael of the first ever S-rank gate that had opened, an event that no one could forget. Michael nodded, recalling the catastrophic dungeon break that had destroyed the entire West Coast area. In response to that disaster, America had recruited the world's strongest hunters by offering them huge rewards. Out of all those who participated, only 5 had survived the raid, earning them the title of national-level hunters, a rank that came with authority equal to that of a nation. Among the monsters they faced was Kamish, the dragon known as the Inextinguishable Flame. Kamish had single-handedly killed hundreds of top-ranking hunters, leaving a devastating mark on history. As they reached the basement level, Director Brennan asked if Michael could believe there was a silver lining to that tragedy. Michael hesitated, but then realized what the director was implying. Brennan confirmed his suspicion as they entered the last room on the level. Inside, Brennan approached a safe and carefully opened it, revealing a heavily secured runestone inside a tempered glass box. This was the runestone that had come from Kamish's remains. Brennan explained that it had been 8 years since the Kamish raid, and there had yet to be a mage-class national-level hunter. The runestone had been waiting in this cold basement, its rightful owner still unknown. However, Brennan believed that Kamish would once again bestow a valuable gift upon their country. As he looked at the mortal remains of Kamish, Brennan's mind raced with possibilities, hoping that this powerful artifact could be the key to their current predicament. After his shower, Jin-Woo stood in front of the bathroom mirror, examining his reflection. He noticed that since his reawakening, he had grown a few inches taller and had become more fit. Jin-Woo wondered if he had really changed that much, as he considered himself fairly slim with average looks. He pondered whether the buffs he had gained from the will to survive were responsible for these changes. The ability stated that any damages to the body will be restored, so perhaps that included clearing up his skin as well. Curious about how others perceived him, Jin-Woo peeked into the living room where his sister, Gina, was lying on the couch. Grinning, he decided to ask for her opinion on his appearance. Gina, however, wasn't impressed and playfully teased him, saying he just looked like a bum in her eyes. Jin-Woo responded by pinching her cheek, which led to her usual kick at his shin, though she only ended up hurting herself. Amused by their banter, Jin-Woo reminded Gina of his strength and jokingly questioned how she managed to get into school with such a bird brain. Gina proudly declared that she was at the top of her class, though Jin-Woo pointed out it was only for her mock exams. The conversation shifted when Jin-Woo mentioned his plans to form a new guild. Gina, intrigued, asked about the name he had in mind. Jin-Woo suggested Solo Play Guild, but Gina quickly pointed out that it didn't make sense since he used his abilities to summon shadow soldiers, meaning he wasn't truly a solo player. After considering her brother's idea, Gina suggested the name Ahjin Guild. She explained that the characters Ah meant I and Jin meant to go forward. Jin-Woo found the name clever, especially when Gina revealed that she chose it because it was her name spelled backward. Jin-Woo agreed that Ahjin was not too bad of a name for his new guild. That night, Haein lay under her blanket, feeling overwhelmed with embarrassment. The memory of her earlier conversation played over and over in her mind. She couldn't believe she had said, "I think so." It was practically a confession, and the thought made her cringe. As she burrowed deeper into her blanket, she couldn't help but wonder about Jin-Woo's response to her words. Jin-Woo had questioned whether there wasn't a better way to handle the situation than joining the guild. At the time, Haein had used the excuse of needing to think it over as a way to escape the conversation. But now, every time she reflected on that moment, her mind went blank and her face flushed with embarrassment. She told herself that it was natural to be interested in Jin-Woo since he had saved her life. But she knew deep down that her feelings were more complicated. Her thoughts drifted to Min Byung-yu, the healer whose abilities had actually saved her. Suddenly, a faint memory surfaced, a voice she had almost forgotten. Haein immersed herself deeply in her thoughts, desperately trying to latch onto the fleeting memory. It was recent, yet it felt so distant, like a dream that slips away just as you wake up. The memory tugged at her mind, pulling her out of the darkness. A voice echoed faintly, speaking about Jin-Woo, urging her to remember. Slowly, the memory began to take shape, becoming clearer. It was Byung-Yu's shadow, tinged with an unusual worry that was unlike him, his eyes filled with concern as he spoke to her. He had told her to warn Jin-Woo, to tell him to be careful of the power he possessed. The realization sent a chill down Haein's spine as she finally remembered the encounter with Hunter Min Byung-Yu. At the Knights Guild, the atmosphere was tense as Yoon-tae brought important news to Jong-soo. A new gate had appeared the previous day, and Yoon-tae informed him that it would be difficult for the guild to obtain a raid permit due to the gate's high rank. While it wasn't an S-rank gate, it was close enough to cause concern. Jong-soo acknowledged the danger, knowing that the guild could face serious risks if they weren't careful during the raid. Yoon-tae explained that if the gate were S-rank, it would be best to give up on it altogether. The Knights Guild didn't have the manpower to form a proper assault squad for such a high-level gate. However, as one of the 5 major guilds in the country, they couldn't afford to fail without damaging their reputation. Jong-soo was frustrated, understanding that most people underestimated the difficulty of A-rank gates, thinking they were all the same. Yoon-tae mentioned that if they passed on this gate, the famed guild would likely seize the opportunity, which made Jong-soo's eye twitch in irritation. The idea of handing over a gate that had appeared so close to their own territory was infuriating to him. He knew that while their A-rank hunters were strong, comparable to those in other major guilds, the lack of any S-rank hunters was what held them back. As they discussed their options, another hunter, Young Yerim, an A-rank healer, joined the conversation. She suggested forming an alliance with another guild, but Jong-soo was skeptical. He doubted any guild would agree to help, knowing that the Knights Guild only sought assistance because they didn't believe they could clear the gate on their own. Young Yerim then proposed bringing in an individual hunter instead of forming a guild alliance. Jongsu was initially dismissive, questioning how a single hunter could make a difference in such a high-level raid. However, when she mentioned Sung Ji-nu, Jongsu reconsidered. He realized that joining forces with Hunter Sung Ji-nu might not only improve their chances of safely clearing the gate, but also enhance their public image. Yuntai mentioned that Ji-nu had recently cleared an A-rank gate on a highway, but had otherwise kept a low profile. Jongsu decided that contacting Ji-nu directly was necessary, and instead of handling it over the phone, he resolved to visit Ji-nu in person to discuss this crucial matter. The next day, Ji-nu went to the office with a decision about the new guild name. He proposed the name Ahjin Guild. Jin-Ho was thrilled with the suggestion, feeling relieved that it wasn't something like Solo Play Guild. With the name settled, Ji-nu and Jin-Ho knew they only needed to recruit one last founding member to complete the team. Jin-Ho then asked about Hunter Cha Hae-yin, curious about why Ji-nu hadn't chosen her. Ji-nu explained that she wasn't the right fit for their guild, leaving Jin-Ho puzzled. Cha Hae-in was an S-rank hunter, young, with an impressive record, and even beautiful, qualities that seemed perfect for their guild. But Ji-nu had something different in mind. He was looking for someone with a hunter's license, who had no interest in joining a guild, but was still trustworthy. As they were discussing potential candidates, there was a knock at the door. Ji-nu wondered if it might be Hunter Cha again, but when he opened the door, he was met with three unfamiliar faces. Park Jong-soo, the guild master of the Knights Guild, along with Yuntai and Young Yerim. Jong-soo introduced himself and then showed Ji-nu a video of a gigantic gate that had appeared in Busan City. The gate was massive, emitting an overwhelming amount of mana, which matched its size, although it had not been officially classified as S-rank by the association. This was the largest gate ever to appear in Busan, and the situation was urgent. As Ji-nu watched the video, he thought about Busan and briefly considered whether he should visit Ju-hee and have her treat him to some sashimi while he was there. As the conversation continued, Young Yerim wondered if Ji-nu might give her an autograph if she asked. However, Park Jong-soo quickly shifted the discussion to a more pressing matter. He informed Ji-nu that the Hunters Association was refusing to grant them a raid permit for the massive gate because there were no S-rank hunters in the Knights Guild. The association believed the raid would be too risky under those circumstances, but there was a possibility they might get the permit if Ji-nu agreed to join their assault team. To sweeten the deal, Jong-soo offered Ji-nu 20% of the profits, a generous share compared to the usual 10% that S-rank hunters typically received. Ji-nu, however, had a different idea in mind. He proposed a 50-50 split, which took Jong-soo by surprise. Ji-nu explained that he would join them only if they treated him as a guild rather than an individual hunter. He also mentioned that he was in the process of founding his own guild called Ahjin. Sweat trickled down Jong-soo's face as he tried to negotiate, offering a 40-60 split instead. But Ji-nu wasn't interested in haggling. Jong-soo, realizing that Ji-nu was far from a pushover despite his young appearance, agreed to the 50-50 terms. However, he added one condition: Ji-nu would need to defeat the dungeon boss. Ji-nu readily agreed. Jong-soo then mentioned that since it had been a while since the gate was discovered, they would need to raid it the next day at the latest. He offered to give Ji-nu a ride to Busan, but Ji-nu declined, explaining that he had plans for the day and would join them tomorrow instead. He assured them that he wouldn't be late. As they were wrapping up the meeting, Yuntae noticed something odd, thinking he saw Ji-nu's shadow move. Jong-soo brushed it off, wondering if Yuntae was drunk. Just as the meeting was about to end on a good note, Ji-nu's phone began vibrating on the table. Checking the caller ID, he saw a number he didn't recognize. Excusing himself, Ji-nu stepped outside the office to take the call. To his surprise, the familiar voice of his mother, Kyung-hee, greeted him. She had just bought a cell phone and called because she wanted to hear his voice. Ji-nu, happy to hear from her, suggested they have dinner together that night, as it had been a while since they last spent time together. Kyung-hee agreed, and Ji-nu looked forward to the evening with his mother. The next day at Gwangali Beach in Busan, all the elite hunters of the Knights Guild gathered at the meeting place. There was a sense of excitement in the air as they anticipated the upcoming raid. However, the guildmaster Jong-soo was filled with nervousness. He anxiously awaited Ji-nu's arrival, regretting not insisting that Ji-nu come with them the day before. The time was ticking down, with only 5 minutes left before they needed to start the raid. Meanwhile, Ji-nu stepped out of his apartment building, dressed casually in comfortable clothes and sneakers. He glanced up at the sky, noticing gray clouds gathering, briefly wondering if his sister Gina had taken an umbrella with her. But that thought quickly passed as he focused on the task ahead. Ji-nu knew it was time to move. He activated Shadow Exchange, seamlessly swapping places with his Shadow Soldier to reach the meeting point instantly. At Guangali Beach, a large crowd had gathered, their eyes fixated on the enormous gate that had appeared, despite the gloomy clouds hanging overhead. Among the onlookers was Jin-Woo, who observed the scene intently. The gate was even more imposing up close, its size daunting. Jin-Woo took note of the various teams assembled for the raid. The hauling team was stationed on one side, while the mining team was on the opposite end. The assault team, consisting of 13 A-rank hunters and 20 B-rank hunters, stood ready. Jin-Woo couldn't help but be impressed by the sheer number of A-rank hunters present. It was a testament to the strength of the Knights Guild, known for having the highest number of A-rank hunters under their command. As Jin-Woo emerged from his thoughts, he found himself surrounded by the other hunters. They were eager and curious, their questions coming at him in rapid succession. They marveled at his abilities, especially after witnessing his performance during the Jeju Island Raid. The sheer number of shadow soldiers he could summon left them in awe. Sensing Jin-Woo's unease, Yerim, the healer of the Knights Guild's elite assault team, stepped in to help. She introduced herself to Jin-Woo, expressing her hope that they could work well together, given their roles in the raid. Yerim's intervention was a relief for Jin-Woo, providing a brief respite from the barrage of questions. Jong-Soo Park, the guild master, was thrilled to see Jin-Woo and greeted him enthusiastically. However, Jin-Woo was surprised to learn that Jong-Soo had not yet informed the other hunters about the leadership arrangement for the raid. Jong-Soo quickly addressed the group, announcing that he, as the guild master, would be leading the raid. This news was met with some disappointment from the other hunters, who had hoped that Jin-Woo would take charge. Despite the grumbling, Jong-Soo explained that Jin-Woo would be responsible for protecting the backline, ensuring everyone's safety. Some hunters questioned whether they needed protection, feeling confident in their abilities. Jong-Soo, however, took their remarks in stride, acknowledging their confidence and urging everyone to get started. With the preparations complete, Jong-Soo signaled the beginning of the raid and the group moved forward, ready to face the challenges that awaited them within the gate. At Gina's high school, 3 male students were grumbling as they were sent on an errand by their art teacher. They felt annoyed and unfairly burdened with tasks that weren't theirs. Despite their complaints, they made their way to the second art classroom, which had been turned into a storage space. As they unlocked the door, a thick cloud of dust greeted them, a sign that the room hadn't been used in a long time. The room was cluttered with old art supplies, abandoned drawings, and statues used for sketching. As they discussed how many statues they needed to carry back, one of the students noticed something unusual in the far corner of the room. The others joined him, curious about what had caught his attention. There on the wall was a large blue hole, a gate about the size of a person. The biggest of the 3, trying to appear unbothered, inspected the gate. He assured the others that it was no big deal, believing that only hunters could pass through and nothing could come out from the gate, which he assumed was safe. He placed his hand on its surface, confident that nothing could happen. However, at that very moment, a crack appeared on the surface of the gate, and a hand shot out, grabbing the student's head. He struggled, but the hand's grip was unbreakable. In a horrifying instant, a loud crack echoed through the room, and blood splattered everywhere as the student's head was crushed. The 2 remaining students screamed in terror as they were splattered with their friend's blood. The black surface of the gate shattered like glass, and magic beasts began pouring out into the world, bringing with them a wave of destruction. Orcs were natural-born predators, excelling in tracking and hunting weaker prey. Though their intelligence was lower than that of humans, their instincts for hunting were unmatched. Now that the barrier between their dungeon and the human world had disappeared, the orcs began to spill out into the open. 2 of these monsters, filled with excitement at the scent of flesh and blood, had managed to suppress their natural instincts for the past week. They had been tasked with scouting and had remained hidden in the darkness, waiting for the right moment. Their keen senses soon alerted them to the presence of prey nearby. The first orc sensed that the structure they were in was filled with potential victims. There were multiple floors above them, each one teeming with prey. The leader orc, driven by the thrill of the hunt, decided it was time to begin. He commanded his companion to summon their brothers, planning to start a full-scale assault once they had eliminated all the humans in the building and fortified their position. As the leader orc walks through the corridor, he noticed 2 students in the distance, engaged in a casual conversation. Without hesitation, the orc charged at them, his axe held high. The students, caught completely off guard, stood frozen in disbelief as the predator closed in on them. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching! In the emergency center of the Hunters Association, the atmosphere became tense as an urgent phone call came in. The receptionist, an experienced employee, answered quickly. On the other end was a teenage girl, her voice shaking with fear. The receptionist tried to remain calm and professional, asking how she could assist, but the girl's words were fragmented by her sobbing. She mentioned that she was at her school, hiding in a bathroom, while outside, terrifying magic beasts roamed. The receptionist's eyes widened in shock, realizing the gravity of the situation. As the girl struggled to speak, overwhelmed by fear, the receptionist pieced together the details. The girl was not alone initially, but her friend was no longer with her, leaving her to face this nightmare alone. The receptionist urged the girl to stay calm, reassuring her that hunters were already on their way and wouldn't give up on her. The girl, slightly more composed now, asked if this meant she would survive. Sensing a chance to keep the girl grounded, the receptionist continued to offer comfort and asked her to describe the monsters. The girl described them as having human-like bodies, but ugly faces with green skin. The receptionist quickly recognized them as orcs. Panic surged in the receptionist's eyes as she realized the danger the girl was in. She immediately told the girl to escape, but it was too late. An orc, its axe dripping with blood, entered the bathroom. The sound of the bathroom door being ripped open echoed through the phone, followed by the girl's desperate screams for help. The receptionist, now trembling with fear herself, could only listen helplessly as the girl's voice was cut off by a final blood-curdling scream. Anguished screams echoed throughout the school. Less than half the student body had successfully escaped the building. Those remaining were either already corpses lying on the ground or running for their lives from the orcs. However, their efforts were futile. The orcs had begun their hunt from the bottom floor and gradually moved upward, killing everyone in sight. Chaos erupted as students fled in terror, their cries of fear mixing with desperate pleas for help as some shouted about their friends being trapped inside. The panicked voices blended with reassurances that the hunters would handle the monsters, urging everyone to just run through the school corridors. Orcs, with blood dripping from their axes, stood over the lifeless bodies of their victims, their cruel eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The orcs, though disappointed that some of their prey had escaped, remained confident. They knew there were still plenty of students trapped inside the building. On the top floor, where the 12th grade classrooms were located, students like Gina huddled in fear. The sounds of screams from below reached their ears, but there was little they could do. The classrooms had been hastily barricaded, but the makeshift defenses offered little comfort. The boys in the room gripped chairs and a mop, their hands trembling with fear, knowing they were no match for the brutal orcs. Suddenly, the door was forcefully blown out of its frame, sending the students into a frenzy of panic. The chief orc, his body covered in the blood of countless victims, stormed into the classroom. One boy, desperate to escape, bolted toward the back door, only to be struck down by an orc lying in wait. The axe embedded in his forehead ended his life instantly. With both exits blocked by the orcs, the remaining students were trapped. They pressed themselves against the windows, knowing that jumping from the 6th floor or facing the orcs would lead to the same grim fate. Amid the chaos, Gina huddled with her classmates in a corner, her heart pounding with fear. In that moment of terror, she clung to a single hope: her brother, Jin-Woo. Squeezing her eyes shut, she called out to him in her mind, believing with all her heart that he would come for her. The chief orc, sensing something far more powerful than the other humans, scanned the group of terrified students and zeroed in on Gina. Her presence stood out, and the orc was immediately drawn to her. The smell emanating from Gina was unmistakable. She had to die. With cold determination, the orc lifted his axe, his eyes locked on Gina. She watched in horror as the weapon rose above her head, her heart pounding with fear. Desperately, she shut her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. But just as the orc prepared to strike, something unexpected happened. Black smoke began to rise from Gina's shadow. In an instant, a high orc clad in black armor emerged, gripping the chief orc's wrist tightly. The chief orc, caught off guard, could barely react before the armored figure slammed its fist down on the orc's head with incredible force. The impact was so brutal that the chief orc shot through the roof like a rocket, ending the threat with a single devastating blow. More of these high orcs emerged, their imposing figures materializing from the shadows, ready to protect Gina and eliminate any remaining danger. Jin-Woo entered the dungeon, greeted by the familiar system message visible only to him. The The dungeon's passages were enormous, as if designed for towering giants. As he moved forward, a sudden commotion erupted. Jong-soo screamed as a two-headed ogre appeared at the entrance, its red eyes glowing menacingly. The massive creature, wielding a club that looked like an uprooted tree, posed an immediate threat. The ogre swung its club with all its might, aiming to crush anything in its path. Jong-soo, the tank of the group, charged forward and used his abilities to create a shield. He raised it just in time to block the powerful blow, standing his ground with unwavering determination. As Jong-soo held the line, he called out to Yoon-tae, who dashed in confidently with his sword at lightning speed. With precision and agility, Yoon-tae leapt onto the ogre, slashing at both of its eyes. The beast roared in agony as Yoon-tae signaled the others to strike and inflict as much damage as possible. The Knights Guild hunters launched a coordinated counterattack. The frontline hunters combined their strength, their blades moving in perfect sync as they slashed into the thick hides of the ogres. Meanwhile, the mages positioned behind them provided crucial support, chanting incantations and summoning fiery spells that rained down like meteors, scorching the massive creature and adding to the chaos of the battle. The ogre, its body riddled with cuts and burns, staggered before finally collapsing with a heavy thud. The team achieved a flawless victory, taking down the high-level monsters without sustaining any injuries. Jong-soo called for a brief regroup, acknowledging the difficulty of the raid. He mentioned that encountering a twin-headed ogre at the entrance of a dungeon was unusual and ominous. Jin-Woo, with his extensive knowledge, identified the creature as a gravekeeper. Jong-soo explained it's often a sign that an army of undead awaited deeper within. Yoon-tae, trying to keep the tension under control, asked his boss, Jong-soo, not to jinx their situation. However, as the hunters observed the scene, they noticed something strange. The undead creatures had appeared, and instead of charging at them as expected, they were backing away, almost as if they were being chased by something even more terrifying. Jin-Woo unimpressed with the situation. He had high expectations for this high-tier A-rank dungeon. Suddenly, a jolt of adrenaline shot through Jin-Woo as his heart raced. He picked up strong signals from the high orc warriors he had assigned to protect Gina. Something was wrong in her area, and he couldn't ignore it. Without hesitation, he made a quick decision. Turning to Jong-soo, Jin-Woo informed him that an urgent matter had come up and he needed to leave immediately. Jong-soo, taken aback, protested, worried about the danger the team might face without Jin-Woo's presence. But Jin-Woo, with a cold glint in his eyes, assured him that he would summon someone just as reliable to take his place. Without further delay, Jin-Woo called forth the most powerful soldier in his shadow army, Baru. The Ant King, cloaked in black smoke, appeared in response to his master's command. The sight of Baru, with his terrifying levels of mana, sent the hunters scrambling back in fear. Jong-soo, shocked, recognized the creature from the Jeju Island Raid. The hunters were uneasy at the thought of finishing the raid with such a powerful being among them. Jin-Woo, however, remained calm, informing them that the soldiers he summoned, including Baru, would assist them. He assured Jong-soo that 20 of these soldiers would be more than enough. Yerim, still in shock, questioned Jin-Woo's decision to leave after unleashing such a formidable force. Jin-Woo's icy stare silenced her, as he coldly stated that if they didn't want his help, he could call back his minions, but the consequences would be on the Knights Guild, not on him. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Jong-soo quickly agreed, leaving the rest of the strike squad, including Yerim, speechless at Jin-Woo's unwavering resolve. Jin-Woo thought to himself how much time remained until his shadow exchange ability cooled down. Frustration welled up as he realized there was still over an hour left before he could use it again. Cursing the timing, Jin-Woo knew he couldn't afford to wait that long. Without hesitation, he turned and disappeared from the strike squad's view. Jong-soo, stunned, remarked that Jin-Woo had really left, while Yoon-tae nervously asked what they should do next. But Jin-Woo was already focused on his next move. He needed to get out of the dungeon immediately. His mind filled with rage, Jin-Woo pushed forward, determined to clear his path. The undead magic beasts blocking his way sensed his immense power and dropped to their knees, bowing before him. Jin-Woo was momentarily surprised. Could they be reacting to his necromancer abilities? But there was no time to ponder this unusual situation. Dismissing the dagger in his hand back into his inventory, Jin-Woo sprinted toward the exit and summoned Kaizel, his winged wyvern covered in black steam. As he emerged from the dungeon, the crowd outside the gate stared in astonishment. What was Hunter Sung doing coming out alone? Ignoring their curious gazes, Jin-Woo climbed onto Kaizel's back. With a single command, Jin-Woo urged Kaizel to fly as fast as possible to his sister. The dragon roared in delight, taking off with powerful flaps of its wings, ready to smash through any obstacles in their path. The spectators watched in awe as Kaizel soared into the sky, carrying Jin-Woo toward his destination. In the classroom, an orc's head shattered with a single powerful blow, its body collapsing to the floor. The soldiers that Jin-Woo had hidden in Gina's shadow had revealed their terrifying strength. The students were horrified, unable to comprehend how the monstrous beast that had threatened their lives was now crushed by an even more monstrous force. The two remaining invaders attempted to flee, but the high orcs that had just crushed their captain's head grabbed them by the necks. The orcs, desperate to escape, stopped resisting as soon as their heads were slammed hard against the floor, bursting upon impact. Two lifeless bodies hit the ground with a heavy thud. The students, stunned by what they had just witnessed, began to realize that these high orcs had saved them. They were no longer the monsters they feared, but had become their protectors. The three orcs attacking the classroom had been dealt with in an instant, and now the high orcs stood silently, guarding Gina. Confused and still in shock, Gina asked about her brother, wondering where he was, but the high orcs remained silent. They wouldn't let her leave their side, understanding the dangers that still lurked within the building. As if to confirm their caution, heavy footsteps echoed up the stairs, growing louder and closer with each passing second. The ominous sound filled the air, signaling the arrival of a greater threat. Suddenly, a gate cracked open and a throne emerged with a thunderous boom. The final restriction had been lifted, unleashing the dungeon's master. The orc leader, Groktar, chief of the Crimson Blade tribe, stepped out, declaring his unstoppable power. His subordinate hurriedly reported that a group of high orcs was helping the humans. Groktar, unimpressed, asked how many there were. Upon learning there were only 3, he sneered at the idea that his tribe's warriors couldn't defeat them, calling it pathetic. Lifting his massive axe, Groktar commanded his subordinate to lead the way, determined to crush any resistance in his path. Groktar's eyes gleamed with a murderous intent as he prepared to slaughter everyone in his path. The high orc warriors, though strong, were no match for Groktar, the chieftain of the orc tribe. Moving with agility, Groktar effortlessly dodged the high orc's attacks and drew the curved blade from his waist. Outside the classroom, the orcs that had been forced to retreat by their enemies cheered, chanting Groktar's name. They believed their leader would easily overpower the high orcs. Groktar, boasting about his victories, pointed to the tattoos that covered his body, each one a symbol of the many enemies he had slain. Despite the high orcs' strength, they struggled to keep up with Groktar's relentless attacks. He taunted them, daring them to put up a better fight. When they managed to block his sword, Groktar acknowledged their effort, but remained dominant. With a swift motion, Groktar sliced through the high orcs, expecting them to fall. To his surprise, the high orcs regenerated, rising again and again despite his efforts. Groktar wondered if this was some kind of spell, but no matter how many times he cut them down, they kept coming back. The realization that he could kill hundreds of them without ending the battle began to frustrate him. Meanwhile, a voice in Groktar's head urged him to kill the humans. The constant nagging gave him a headache, but he knew he couldn't ignore the high orcs to pursue the humans. The battle seemed endless, but Groktar was determined to finish it, no matter the cost. He knew that if the high orcs were controlled by some magic spell, he only needed to eliminate their shaman to break that control. As he scanned the room, his eyes locked onto Gina, who stood behind the high orcs, trembling. There was a faint connection between her and the high orcs, and Groktar's eyes blazed with realization. He was certain that she was the source. Groktar commanded his subordinate orcs to capture the girl, knowing the high orcs would be powerless during their regeneration. Following his order, one of the orcs charged toward Gina. The high orcs tried to intercept, but they were quickly surrounded and attacked by the other orcs, who stabbed and sliced at them relentlessly, preventing them from reaching Gina. Groktar's assumption proved correct. While the high orcs were occupied, Groktar himself advanced on Gina. He grabbed her by the neck with one powerful hand, lifting her off the ground effortlessly. His gaze was filled with cold triumph as he looked into her eyes. Groktar, filled with malicious intent, was just about to squeeze the life out of Gina when a deafening roar echoed from the distance. It was the cry of a winged dragon, piercing through the air with an unmistakable power. Groktar's instincts kicked in immediately. Something terrifying was approaching, fast. A sudden surge of anxiety froze Groktar in place, as the sound of the creature's approach grew louder and louder. His warrior senses were screaming in warning. He released Gina, who fell to the ground gasping for air, her friend rushing to her side, asking if she was alright. But Groktar couldn't focus on them. His attention was entirely consumed by the approaching threat. Every second, the creature drew closer with terrifying speed, a screech filling the air. Groktar's eyes widened, his jaw dropping as he realized the magnitude of the power heading straight for them. Groktar shouted to his orc warriors, warning them to brace for impact. But before they could react, an earth-shattering explosion tore through the building. Glass shattered, walls crumbled, and orcs guarding the door were blown away like leaves in the wind. The entire wall was obliterated as if it had been struck by a mighty catapult. Amidst the destruction, Gina coughed as dust and debris filled the air. Suddenly, a familiar presence was by her side, Jin-Woo, her brother. He gently patted her head, reassuring her with calm words. She was safe now. Grokter swallowed hard as he faced this new and incredibly powerful adversary. The overwhelming presence of Jin-Woo was undeniable. Grokter, trying to assert himself, introduced himself as Grokter of the Crimson Blade tribe, but before he could finish, Jin-Woo's hand rose, pointing directly at him. An electrifying aura surrounded Jin-Woo, his eyes blurred with fury as he glared at Grokter. "Shut up and wait," Jin-Woo commanded, his voice filled with rage. Jin-Woo gently rubbed his sister's back, asking if she was okay. Gina, with tears in her eyes, threw her arms around him as soon as her coughing subsided. He stroked her hair tenderly, like soothing a frightened child. Apologizing for being late, Jin-Woo looked around, making sure everyone was safe. The students, relieved, confirmed they were okay. Jin-Woo then turned his gaze to Song-Yi, asking if she was alright. Though she answered that she was fine, Song-Yi couldn't help but notice how scary Jin-Woo felt in that moment. As he carefully examined Gina, the handprint on her face and neck caught his attention, and a fierce blue light ignited in his eyes. Without a moment's hesitation, Jin-Woo commanded Igris to take care of Gina. He gently pried his sister off him, even as she tried to cling to him, and then summoned enough shadow soldiers to match the number of students. He instructed the shadow soldiers to escort the students downstairs. The orcs, frustrated at seeing their prey slipping away, bristled with anger, but Jin-Woo shot them a terrifying glare, freezing them in their tracks. Kaizel spread its massive wings, allowing the shadow soldiers to carry the students safely down from the broken side of the building. Grokter, watching this unfold, realized that the high orcs were Jin-Woo's soldiers and questioned him, trying to understand who he was and how he could speak their language. However, Jin-Woo's expression remained grave and unresponsive to Grokter's inquiry. Sensing that Jin-Woo had no intention of answering, Grokter didn't waste any more time. With a commanding shout, he ordered his forces to attack. At the command of Grokter, the chieftain, the fierce orc warriors lunged at Jin-Woo with ferocity. From Jin-Woo's perspective, they moved so slowly that it felt as if time itself had slowed down. One orc swung its massive axe at him, but Jin-Woo swiftly grabbed the orc's fingers, crushing them with ease. The orc screamed in agony, and Jin-Woo flipped it upside down, slamming it into the ground before crushing it beneath his foot. As two more orcs approached, Jin-Woo used his skill, the commander's touch, causing them to collide in mid-air. With a simple clench of his fist, he caused them to burst into pieces. More orcs charged at him, their screams echoing through the hall, but Jin-Woo weaved through them effortlessly, crushing them all. He didn't even bother to draw a weapon, using just his finger to make contact with the orcs. Wherever his finger touched, whether it was their heads, shoulders, arms, or stomachs, the orcs exploded on impact. In the blink of an eye, more than 20 orcs had fallen, and Jin-Woo came to a stop in front of Grokter. The orc chieftain could barely follow the blur of after images left by Jin-Woo's movements. Its voice trembled in disbelief as it tried to comprehend what had just happened. Before Grokter could react, Jin-Woo grabbed the monster's jaw with his left hand. The orc chieftain let out a short gasp as Jin-Woo casually strode forward and slammed its head against the wall. The loud wham echoed throughout the empty hall. Jin-Woo scanned the area, taking in the gruesome sight of dead students littering the hallway. He didn't turn away. Instead, he made sure to take stock of every single corpse, ensuring that the one responsible for this massacre would pay for its sins. Jin-Woo's cold gaze returned to Grokter as he demanded answers. His voice was icy as he asked why Grokter's kind was so intent on killing humans. Grokter, trembling in fear, confessed that a voice in its head kept telling it to kill all humans. Jin-Woo pressed further, asking if the voice instructed Grokter to kill him as well. Grokter, desperate and fearful, pleaded for forgiveness, but Jin-Woo was relentless, demanding an answer to his question. Did Grokter hear the voice when looking at him? Grokter continued to beg for forgiveness. Without hesitation, Jin-Woo summoned the Demon Monarch's dagger to his right hand. He coldly acknowledged that Grokter didn't consider him human either. But that didn't matter to Jin-Woo. He told Grokter that while he might forgive him, but the path to forgiveness won't be easy.